Senator Gregg, we appreciate you being with us this morning. Finally, we're going to get some debate on this. Democrats, anyway, have painted Republicans as being nothing more than obstructionists by blocking debate on this. Why did you guys do it?
Because we'd like to get it right. This is a really, really important issue for us as a nation, the vibrance of our economy. There should be two basic purposes here. One is to make sure that we do everything we can to restructure the regulatory atmosphere and also the way markets are created in this country so that we avoid any further or potential systemic risk if we can do that. So we don't have another 2008 type period where the markets basically melted down. And secondly, we have to keep America the best place in the world to create credit and capital, because that's what makes us vibrant. You know, an entrepreneur has an extreme advantage here in the United States versus other countries, because if you've got a good idea and you're willing to take some risk, you can usually get capital and credit and go out and create jobs. And that's what's really at the essence of the vibrance of our economy. We want to make sure we maintain that.
So what in the Democrats' plan, Senator, do you see that prevents people from taking a risk and getting credit?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues here, but I don't think any of them are partisan. I think they can all be resolved. One of the major issues, of course, is the fact that we don't really address one of the core problems, which is underwriting standards. In other words, when you make a loan, make sure that the person can pay it back and make sure that the asset that you're lending on has the value to basically support the loan. Secondly, the derivatives language is problematic, especially that language that came out of the Agriculture Committee. It really would undermine the availability of credit and the use of these instruments which create liquidity in our markets. They're very important. They also need to be reformed, but they need to be reformed in a responsible and mature and thoughtful way. Thirdly, we should be addressing Freddie and Fannie. These two agencies, American people haven't been told this yet, unfortunately, but the American people owe about $500 billion here in order to bail these two agencies out. We ought to be addressing those two agencies in this reform bill, because if you want to look at the next big crisis or a big problem beyond the fact that the federal government is running us off the road in the area of debt, the big issue on the financial side is going to be Freddie and Fannie, these two mortgage companies, and how we get them back to some level of solvency, and how the American taxpayer gets out from underneath this massive debt that basically we're on the hook for.
Senator Gregg, as you know, that controversial $50 billion fund paid for by the banks that was called a bailout fund is now gone. Assuming, since the Republicans are in the minority, you're not going to get everything on your wish list. With the concessions that Republicans were able to win, are you a yes vote for the bill right now as it stands, even if it's not further amended?
No, I'm not, Nora. Or is this Savannah? I'm sorry.
It's Savannah. We're interchangeable because we're all wearing orange today.
Your voices have a certain, I can't see you, and your voices have a certain similar inflection. Basically, the problem here is, well, first, too big to fail is a major issue. It needs to be resolved. I think great strides have been made in that area through the work of Richard Shelby and Chris Dodd. But we still have these other issues which are on the table and we need to address. And one of the core ones is the fact that this bill, I think, approaches the derivatives issue from the wrong direction. Rather than approaching it from making them more transparent and putting more liquidity behind the derivatives, making sure the counterparties have the adequate margins and that there's assets there that can be looked to, using clearinghouses aggressively, it basically creates an artificial event of spinning off the swap desks, which will make those swap desks less viable, and in fact will require massive capital infusions, and we don't know where they'll come from, and will probably destabilize the market. So that's a problem. Another problem is the underwriting standards that I mentioned. Another problem is the fact we don't address Fannie and Freddie. So there's a lot of things that still need to be improved. I expect this bill is going to be on the floor for a while. There are going to be a lot of hopefully very constructive amendments, and we'll get a good bill by the end. At least that's my hope.
You think it's going to pass at the end of the day?
Oh, yeah. I suspect it'll pass. I hope it'll be a better piece of legislation than it is now. It needs to be. And I'm going to try to work to accomplish that.
All right, Senator Gregg, this is Savannah. I am turning it over to my colleague, Nora, to ask a question.
Okay,
Hi,
thanks.
Senator. Good morning.
Hi.
Let me ask you, I know Republicans have joined with Democrats saying they want to end the casino-like atmosphere on Wall Street. But you have, and other Republicans have talked about the derivatives provisions that the Democrats are pushing would essentially hurt Main Street. Can you explain that in terms that almost anybody could understand? How do you think those provisions are going to hurt lending for whether it's small community banks or just even, car companies?
Well, when you go to work in the morning, depending on who you work for, if you're working for a company that sells something into an international market or even into the American market, the odds are pretty good that they're using what's known as a derivative, which is an insurance policy to insure over risks that they can't protect. In other words, if you're selling, let's say you work for Caterpillar, and they're selling tractors in Brazil, they don't want to have to worry about the price of the Brazilian currency. They don't want to have to worry about the price of their supplier's goods. They want to be able to sell that tractor one day, deliver it 6 months later, and know that they're going to make a certain amount of money on it. Otherwise, they can't sell the tractor. So these derivatives instruments basically protect them. They insure over the risks that they can't control, and they're very important. They're very important in the system. $600 trillion of notional derivative value is floating around the system in this world, and that's because they are important to the liquidity of markets. And so on Main Street, the economic activity that occurs on Main Street, you may not see the effect that derivatives have on them directly, but it's having a very distinct and important impact on the ability of commerce to occur, credit to be created, goods to be sold, and Americans to keep jobs.
Senator Gregg, Pat Buchanan here. Look, Greece, in just a matter of a couple of days, was downgraded to junk bond status. Its debt, Portugal's was downgraded, Spain's is downgraded, and now you're going to have scores of billions of euros to bail out Greece. Isn't the United States, in a way, with $10 trillion in debt being piled up in the next 10 years, aren't we going down that same road? And who bails out the USA?
Now, I know this isn't Savannah or Nora.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Yeah. This morning we get a little husky. It's true.
You're absolutely right, Pat. And Greece is a precursor for the industrialized Western democracies. They are all highly over-leveraged. The United States is not that far behind in the area of leverage. Now, we are obviously a stronger economy, and we can monetize our debt, which means we can print money, which puts us in a position of having more flexibility than Greece. But the simple fact is that we have this massive debt, and we're going to double it in 5 years. We're going to triple it in 10 years. When debt to GDP ratio passes 60%, which we will this year, you're in trouble. We're going to be at 80 or 90% ratios here. That's junk bond status, actually. That puts you in the status, in my opinion, of a banana republic. We can't afford that. And Pat, the issue is spending. The issue is spending. The federal government is going from 20% of GDP to 26% of GDP just this year. And it's going to stay there and keep going up, especially as this health care bill has to be paid for. And so unless we get spending under control, we're going to pass to our kids a nation not only that they can't afford, but will probably be fiscally insolvent.
Andrea Mitchell.
Hi, it's Andrea, Senator. Good to talk to you. While you're talking about getting spending under control, the new Deficit Reduction Commission met for the first time, and already liberals, quote, progressives on one side complaining about spending cuts, and Republicans ganging up email blasts against Alan Simpson, the Republican co-chair, because he and the Democratic co-chair, Erskine Bowles, both say that everything has to be on the table, as the president has, that taxes have to be on the table and spending cuts. So if they are saying that you have to approach Medicare and Social Security, and they're willing to do that, but that you have to look at the tax structure as well, what about the guts of the Republicans and the Democrats in Congress to adapt or adopt any of this, rather?
Well, of course, that's why Senator Conrad and I came up with a commission idea. I'd hoped, and we'd hoped, both of us, that it would be a statutory event. Didn't pass. The president's proposed this approach. I'm serving on it. Everything does have to be on the table, Andrea. You can't, one side can't go into the negotiation and say, well, we're only going to talk about things we're interested in, won't talk about things the other side's interested in. In the area, however, of Medicare, we've got a problem, which is that the health care bill, really, it took over $1 trillion of Medicare savings and moved it over and spent it on new entitlement programs instead of spending it on addressing the Medicare issues. So it's going to, where we find additional savings in Medicare is going to be a big problem, big issue. We should be able to correct the Social Security imbalance. It's very doable. All it takes is people of good purpose sitting around a table. On the tax side, Senator Wyden and I, who's a Democratic senator from Oregon, Ron Wyden, have introduced a major reform bill which tracks what President Reagan and Bill Bradley did back in '86, basically reduces the the tax rates for everybody, especially for middle-income people and for corporations. Creates more incentive for capital formation by eliminating a lot of deductions. Now, that's the type of tax reform that I think can work, and I think will generate more revenues and be actually a pro-investment type of tax reform. So we can look at that type of issue, in my opinion.
Well, that's not a tax increase, though.
It will generate more revenue. You know, you don't have to increase taxes to generate more revenue. You have to have a more efficient tax law that causes people to take more risk, create more investment, generate more taxable activity, and also collects taxes that are owed. You know, we've got $300 billion of unowed taxes that are owed taxes that we haven't collected.
All right, Senator Judd Gregg, Republican of New Hampshire, thanks for keeping it all straight this morning with all these voices at the table. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Senator.
Thanks, Senator.